Good day, everyone. Welcome to another Live with Kevin. I'm so glad that you're with me, whatever time of the day or night it might be for you. I'd love to know where you are. I don't necessarily need to know what time, excuse me, but I'd love to know where you are. So, on whatever social platform you're on, if you would say hello using the chat function, or the comments section of wherever you're at, say hello. Tell us where you're located. I'd love to know that. My guest would love to know that as well. Excuse me again. And while you're here, I'm asking you to do that because I'm curious where you're located. But I'm also asking you to do that because I want you to get used to commenting, because I want this to be as interactive as it can possibly be. I want you to imagine that you were joining my guest and I for a cup of coffee. And if we were all sitting around the table having a cup of coffee or whatever your beverage of choice at this time of day might be for you, if you had a comment or a question or an idea, you would offer it, right? Like you would engage in the conversation. And I want you to do that here as well. When you do that, we'll have a better conversation. It will help perhaps give me some insight into how to guide the conversation. And perhaps you get your specific questions answered. So doing all of that will make it better for you and for me and for my guest. But it will also make for a better podcast because, yes, this will eventually be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast as I'm recording this morning in about a month. So because of that, no one on the podcast would want to hear the last minute and a half of me chatting with you. So I'm going to do a countdown where we will trim the audio and video for the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. The best leaders know how to bring out the best in themselves, their team members, and their teams collectively. That goal is the focus of our conversation today. We'll talk about how to support co-creation and collaboration and where we need to start to make all those good things happen. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live because all of these episodes are live streamed and on your favorite social media channels. So to find out when those are happening and then get involved, you can join either our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. To learn all about that, you can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Do that and you can be clued in and join us in the future. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Master Classes. Pick from 13 important leadership and life skills to help you become a more effective, productive, and confident leader while overcoming some of the toughest challenges that we face as leaders. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. And with that, it's time for me to bring in my guest. She is here. Let me introduce her to you. Her name is Lisa Danels. She is the founder and executive director of Human Edge, is a senior executive talent and leadership consultant and coach. She focuses on developing mindful and purpose-driven leaders, unlocking their full leadership potential. In that, we share commonality. Lisa holds a master's degree in organizational development and human resource management from New York University and a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary public policy and administration with a concentration on international relations from the University of New York at Buffalo. She's a certified executive coach and the author of Human Edge Advantage, Mastering the Art of Being All In. She resides in Basel, Switzerland, where she is coming from, joining us today. And Lisa, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for being here.
You as well, Kevin. My pleasure.
So I often like to ask this question when I start, Lisa. Like when you were 10 years old, you did not expect you were writing books about human potential, collaboration, co-creation, etc. So very quickly, give us a high arc of the journey that leads you to doing this kind of work.
Yeah, probably not 10, but not too far after that.
Oh.
So I was very fortunate in high school, although I was always more geared towards science and math. That was kind of where I excelled in high school. But in high school, I was part of a club called Future Business Leaders of America. and I was a state officer for that club. So I did get exposed to American Management Association. We went away for 7 days of leadership training. So I had this even before I went to university, and I kind of caught the bug. But but I was always in the space of, oh, I want to study. I want to do research and cancer research because I saw my aunt die of cancer. So I went off when I went off to university. I actually ended up going into the sciences, and probably in the middle of my junior year, I realized this is probably not the right pathway for me. And then I made the shift. So, and then where I really fell in love in the field is as part of my internship. And this speaks to one of the things in the book, which is about intuition, is I walked into at University in Buffalo. They didn't really hold your hand. It was kind of like a dog world, figure it out on your own. And I had to do an internship. So they gave me a big binder and they're like, pick out the internship you want. Not what do you want to do? Nobody had a conversation with me. So I went through the binder and page by page. And then there was an internship, which was in the training department within the university. And I said, that's what I want. And then that's how I found my pathway.
There
So
you
then,
go.
so it's really, so I'm one of the fortunate ones that found my pathway quite early on in my career. And then when I graduated, I said, well, most important, let me get into a good company. So I went to work at American Express. And then very shortly after I landed at American Express, I asked people around, to say, what is the right degree? Do I go for an MBA or do I go for a master's? And that's where I landed. And so within 6 months of working, I started going back at night for my master's degree in organizational development and resource management. And then I really fell in, and then it kind of brought me back to the high school experience about the leadership development. But I will tell you, because I think this is important about intuition, is I remember my mom, when I used to get home from school, she would be on the phone talking to her friend. And one day I was sitting there was like a stair below into the kitchen. And one day she hung up the phone and I looked at her and I go, Mom, one day I'm going to write a best-selling book. I don't know where it came from. I really don't, but I just remember that moment very early on in my it was high school time that I said that to her.
There you go. Well, we're going to come back to intuition, and I want to move on.
Okay.
Actually, what you've just said, it relates to, I think, the first big point in the book. It's actually in the introduction. And so I just want you to talk about this and how it relates to the book. The idea is that everything is interconnected. And really, the story you just said had a bunch of interconnections as well.
Interconnections, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me what you mean, or give me an example of what you mean when you say that everything is interconnected.
So it happens on two levels. So let me speak to the organizational level, and then I'll get to more of what I would call the mystical level. So when you get to the organizational level, when I studied organizational development, one of the things that was quite important is that the leaders that were most impactful and the OD practitioners that were most impactful understood, what does it mean to work in a system? That if you make one decision here, what is the ramification on the system on the other part? And a lot of leaders don't get that, because what they do is they make one decision and it has a negative impact on other parts of the system. So that's kind of on I would say the more the mundane or the organizational level. But when I really talk about it in the book, when I talk about everything's connected, I'm really talking about what I would call the entanglement theory. When you get into physics, when you talk about how we are interconnected on an energetic level, that's what I'm really talking about when I say everything is interconnected. So they've shown studies, like the one that I love the most is that a good example of this is that when a woman is pregnant with a child, that when the cells are going back between the umbilical cord, between the mother and the child, that the baby gives stem cells to help the mother heal, and then the mother is giving cells to the child. With that experience, the child and the mother are connected intuitively the rest of their life, because the cells have been entangled with each other. And that's why they say mothers have this intuition about their children. There's a reason for it. It's actually on a scientific level of
cellular level.
Cellular, thank you. Cellular level. So that's what I mean by interconnected. And if we really understand that we are all interconnected. Just think when you walk into a room and someone is excited and has energy, you can pick it up. If you walk into a room and someone's angry and upset, you can pick that up. Why? Because we're interconnected. We are connected on an energetic level in the universe. And if you like the Matrix, it's a good way of thinking about it.
There you go. So the subtitle of the book, which is almost always, everybody, where you really get it in a well done book title, it's the subtitle that ultimately
Yes.
matters. Mastering the art of being all in. And so when I think about this idea of being interconnected, then all in seems to make a whole lot more sense. I told you before we started that I wanted to spend just a little time on your overall framework. And then I'm just going to dip in and we're going to talk about a few of these things and find some of these connections as we go. But just tell us very briefly, there's sort of a 4-step framework that you have that relates to your idea of how do we get people really, truly all in.
All
So
in,
what do you mean by that? And what is that framework?
Yeah, and I think all in is not all in at any cost, because people are working really hard, really intensely, but they're at the end of the year, they're crawling to the finish line. That's not what I mean by all in. I mean about how do people balance their hearts and minds and souls as they're working. So in order to get people all in, there are a couple of key things that need to happen. The first thing that needs to happen is there needs to be this integration of the head, heart, and gut, which allows us more capacity. So if I just step into a situation where I use my mental ability, right? If somebody challenging at work comes up to me with something emotional, then I'm not going to be able to navigate it well. Right? So if I can bring in my heart energy, and then at the same time, if I can understand and be able to connect with them emotionally, but I might not be able to solve the problem that's at hand. But then if I bring in the intuition, right? Now I'm have all 3 qualities at the same time, and this gives me expanded capacity. So that's really what we talk about at the center of the model. And what I see a lot of leaders doing with a lot of the executive coaching I do, I see leaders bifurcating. They're in the mind, they're in the heart. They're in the mind, they're in the heart. Gut is a whole nother level, because gut is not really something that people feel comfortable bringing in yet. We don't talk about it as openly in the cultures in business, but when I did the research on the book and you look at all the fantastic and greatest leaders of the world, they all say intuition is one of the most important things that made them successful. So that's at the center. You wanted to say something. Go ahead, Kevin.
No, I want to say a little bit more about, I want to talk a little bit more about intuition, but like just give us that's
Okay,
the center.
and
Give
we'll
us the
dive
rest of
in.
the framework real quick, then we'll dive in a little bit. Yep.
So then the next thing, that if we really want to get people all in, we need to know ourselves as leaders and as individual contributors or employees. And the reason being is I can't co-create or facilitate with somebody else until I know my own strengths. I need to know what's in my heart. I need to know how I feel, how I show up, right? So one of the big triggers there is this notion around, I call it connecting to self. So this is about exploring and integrating every aspect of yourself to achieve self-mastery. One key element here is about your ability to believe that you have personal agency, that you can shape your future. Once you have that sense of personal power, and you do believe that you can master your mind, because a lot of our minds are very busy and our minds get in our way of being successful, and our emotions. So once we have those ingredients, then I can then connect with somebody else on a really deep level. Because if my stuff is getting in the way, my baggage and my reactive behavior, I can't authentically connect, right? And the next one is about connecting to others. So think about when we have our personal power, then the connecting to others, kind of the code word here is shared power. I know I have something to offer, you have something to offer, and therefore we can connect to each other in a meaningful way, where we can engage them and create a deep sense of belonging. And then when we have those 2 pieces in place, right, then we can create a space of co-creation. And co-creation is where we use the collective genius of everybody. So the one way I like to think about it is, you don't bring a cathedral, right? If you have a solution, you bring a brick, and then I bring a brick, and you bring a brick. And next thing you know, we don't even know what the solution could be, because it's so magical, because we all bring a piece. Because if I just bring a cathedral, right, What can you change? It doesn't allow you to be all in because you can only change maybe the pews or the windows. But if we're co-creating together, like Minecraft in a way, right, then we can build something that's beautiful as long as we hold the same vision,
And we'll
right?
come
Because we
back to
need to
that.
have a collective vision in order to do that.
Yeah, we can co-create, but we don't know where we're headed if we don't know where we
Exactly.
got to know where we're headed.
Exactly. And this is a big difference for leaders now, right? Because beforehand they were so used to about setting the vision and telling people what to do and where to go, right? And now it's like we're co-creating the vision together, but the leaders still need to create the frame, which is the playground and where people can play, and then you let the team fill it in. So as leaders, you don't have to work as hard.
We have to work differently, and you have to
Yes,
work
you
with
work
more
differently, but you don't
uncertainty.
have to work as hard.
You have
Exactly.
to work with more
Yeah,
uncertainty and a lot of other things. I want to go back.
exactly.
You've said quite a bit about it already,
Yeah.
but I really want to talk a little bit more about the role of intuition. Uh,
Mm. But before you go into mission,
because
can I just add one thing? So one
sure.
of the most important things about the model is then there's a little bit of a rope outside the model. And this is what we talk about our masks. So these are childhood coping mechanisms that we carry. And if we don't become aware of them and we don't manage them, we can't take them away because I can't take away my childhood experiences that maybe I didn't get my needs met, and I can't take away them from you. But I can know how to work with them so during times of stress, they don't show up or that I limit the ability. So that's really encompassing the entire model. So now you want to dive into intuition a bit more.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about intuition because, as you said, it's uh, sometimes people ignore it, deny it, or they use it but don't want to admit that they use it. So I'd really like to know a little bit
Yeah.
more about what would you say if someone sort of knows their intuition tells them that they should pay attention, but
Mhm.
they really don't, or they don't feel like they're supposed to. Like help people feel more comfortable and confident
In
with
using it.
listening to their intuition.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I state in the book, and I really stand by this because it gets to that first question you asked me, Kevin, by what do you mean by everything is interconnected, right? So to me, your intuition is your highest form of intelligence. And the reason it's your highest form of intelligence, because if you go with we're all connected, it means you can tap into anything that is in the universe, any knowledge, wisdom, anything that is created, anything that's not created, right? Everything that in essence is there. So if we understand that, then instead of just using a hammer, right, for as a tool, we have this amazing tool to tap into. So if we want to be able to use our intuition, one is we need to cultivate it. It's just like going to the gym, right? Some of us have it more pronounced than others because we've listened to it, we've cultivated. Um, One way that I think, if you think about where people can pay attention to, is the gut instinct is the one that is most prominent, which is, oh, something doesn't feel right, right? And what I would encourage people to do is to say, well, what doesn't feel right, right? Explore it a little bit, ask some more questions why it doesn't feel right, right? Because there's different points of intuition. Like I get downloads, models, information just download when I'm getting introduced to information and things just come together. I also get what we call clairaudience, where I have all of a sudden I have words coming into my head, right? The key thing is we need to be able to differentiate them because some people go, well, I don't know if it's my inner voice or my ego talking or it's my intuition. And the easy way to tell is intuition is short, sweet, and to the point. It doesn't have long sentences. There's no fear involved. It just tells you something, very matter of fact. And that's how you know the difference.
I think your point is a really important one about when you feel that, when you get that sense, to explore it further. Like
Yes.
what so often happens is people immediately downplay it or try to set it to the side, and you need to explore it, and then using your head and heart more
Yes.
to put it all together to say yes, no, not sure, was that really real, was that not real. But like if we just ignore it, deny it, or squelch it,
Yeah.
we don't have any chance. Would
No,
that
and
be
and
fair?
it gets no, absolutely. And it gets I had a leader recently who just said, "Oh, I get these intuitions, and then I just bring it into logic." And she goes, "That's bad, right?" I said, "No, that's actually wonderful because You have to be able to use the head, heart, and mind and the gut together. And you need to be able, so for me, I get a lot of, earlier on, I used to get a lot of impressions, right? And I didn't really know how to take those impressions and architect them into something that was meaningful, right? So I couldn't get the connection between the intuition and the mind. I had to learn how to architect, to be an architect in my life, because then I couldn't bring the insights into something meaningful. So we have to learn how to do that as well.
One of the chapters in the book that I think is especially helpful, in part because leaders, humans, but leaders have
Yeah.
challenges with this idea sometimes, or misappropriate this a bit, is the idea of power. So I just want,
Ooh,
excuse me, to talk a little bit about
yeah.
the difference between personal power and positional power.
Yeah. So there has been a transition going on, I would probably say, over the last 30 to 40 years. And this is when we always thought about leadership, we always thought about power over, which is few people have it, and we try to maintain it and control it, and that other people, we could try to control people. Then we made the shift into more matrixed organizations. And I have to say, this is the gift of Generation X, what they did, because Generation X started to dissolve this power over method kind of mentality, and they started to move what I call power with, which is I want to collaborate, I want to hear from you, I want to understand you, right? And that's great, and we want this power with, but the most important thing is we need to understand the power within, because everybody walking on this planet has equal power. And when we understand that, that means we might not have all the same gifts. I know we don't, right? But if we know what gifts we have, then we can add them to the world and make it a better place. So that's the big difference. So it's this personal power is it doesn't make a difference. I used to work with a CEO of a big pharma company, and I would walk in his office and I would say, hey, what's going on here? And have a dialogue with him. I never said, oh my God, he's the CEO, I can't talk to him, right? Because I walked in going, we have equal power, not equal hierarchy, but equal power in terms of contribution. And I want people to think about that in a different way.
I love that. And that's important not only for us if we sit somewhere in the organization, but how are we
Absolutely.
creating that and allowing that with the folks hierarchically below us?
Yeah.
Um,
And this
talk,
and this gets into, can I just share this because this is an
yeah,
important part. This gets into that personal agency, which is our ability to shape. So we have an assessment that goes with the book. And one of the things we're doing in a research study is we're seeing leaders who are more senior have higher personal agency, right? And middle managers really get stuck here because they're sandwiched between the senior leaders and the below. And they kind of go, well, I can't influence this. I don't have any control. So they're actually giving up their personal power.
100% happens every day,
Giving it up
um,
all the time.
all the time. Yep. So we've talked a little bit about the head, heart, and gut. We've talked a little bit about
Mhm.
knowing ourselves in terms of power piece. I'd like to talk briefly about the role of trust and how
Mm,
that fits together in terms of building the levels of connection that we need in
yeah,
your framework to get to
yeah.
co-creation. So let's just talk about trust for a couple of minutes. Like, what are a couple of key points that you would make about trust for all of us? Maybe give us something to help us think about how we can build it better with
Yeah.
others.
So this was probably the one where I had the most eye opener when I was writing the book and doing the research, because trust really comes from the first 18 months of life. And it's something called attachment, healthy attachment. And 50% of the population does not have healthy attachment. So then you sit there and you watch the dynamics in organizations and you wonder why people are acting the way they're acting. And then you go, well, 50% of these people don't have healthy attachment. So therefore, they're going to show up. Their trust levels are not where they need to be in order to have dynamic, authentic connection. Now, you can
Yeah, so
do
let me
what
just
most,
say something there. So
yeah.
I often, this exact same idea, I often talk about it as a trust thermostat, and like
Mhm.
we've all have a starting point, and we can adjust it, but it takes a lot of work to make that adjustment. But we have to recognize that we come into a working situation, and all of our team members come into a working situation with sort of a set point,
Absolutely.
where they're starting on trust before anything else happens.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And that what I say in the book is I say, instead of reacting and being judgmental, which it's so easy to be, right? What if you, when you had an interaction like that, you took a step back and you were found more compassion for the person, that maybe they didn't get those very important childhood needs met that were required, right? So how do we build it? One is we need to recognize within ourselves where that thermostat is, right? And that's where self-awareness comes in. So one is we need to be able to understand that the level of trust that you have, right, is related to those needs. So if I find myself being reactive, right? And look at the word reactive versus responsive. Reactive means I'm reenacting something from my childhood, something that is unfinished. So if I find myself in reactive behavior, I need to give myself a timeout and I need to say, what is unresolved for me? What's really bothering me? And then once I start to do that, I start to build a greater level of trust with myself. And then I can then better engage with other people, because then I can respond. Even if I'm upset about something, I can still say, Kevin, what happened in that interaction really upset me. And then I can engage with you in a healthy way versus going, oh, Kevin, you never let me participate the way I want to. Right?
Or
Because,
in my head, Kevin's a bad person. I hope no one's
yeah,
thinking that,
exactly.
but some people
Exactly. So
probably
I
have.
think that is a very important thing. I think also when it comes to interpersonal trust, right? One of the things that I found quite astounding in when I did the research is in organizations, we don't we don't repair trust, right? So in our home relationships, in our family relationships or friends, we tend to repair because we have somebody sleeping next to us in bed, right? So that makes it very uncomfortable if we don't reset, right? It's the tension is too high. But in organizations, what we tend to do is we tend to marginalize or move around, and we cut it off instead of really being vulnerable and saying, hey, that last experience with you, really, when you shut me out of that meeting, I really felt that you didn't trust me, or you didn't allow me to bring my expertise to the table. So we have to learn how to repair in organizations in order to really allow for healthy trust. Because look, we're human beings. We're not going to get it right all the time.
Yeah, and I just my observation would be that uh, the leader plays a role in encouraging, supporting,
Mhm.
expecting those conversations, and when teams are remote or hybrid, especially if they're fully
Yes.
remote, it's even easier to hide. It's even easier to walk around, and yet
Yes.
the lack of trust uh, is just as important, right? The breach is just as important, even if we sort of tippy toe around each other or try to ignore each other. It's still causing challenges in the organization. It's creating conflict. It's probably causing a business problem, and that's why, as a leader, we've got to be self-aware, and we've got to be ready and able, and we've got to be modeling that behavior as well.
Yeah, and we need to model it, but we also have to be careful. And I'll tell you where leaders have to be careful is what a lot of people will do is instead of addressing it to the person, they'll go to the manager and they'll do the dump and drop, right? And leaders have to be really careful. And I have no problem if someone needs to blow off steam, but the role of the manager is to coach that person to have the real conversation. So one thing I find when people have a lot of conflict, they don't ask themselves, what's the real conversation that needs to happen? And when you ask that question, you really see a beautiful change in the conversation that takes place between two people. And then things get resolved, because I think a lot of people still have this limitation or this mindset limitation where they think that if I engage with someone in conflict, that I'm going to damage the relationship. And if you look at all your relationships, anytime you resolve a conflict, engage in it and resolve, the relationship actually gets tighter.
I'll make two comments, then we want to move on. One is, you're exactly right. We want, as leaders, we need to support that happening,
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean we're doing it for them. And
absolutely.
so that when someone brings that to you as a leader, whether it's venting or whatever, the first response, what they're hoping you'll do is go take care of it, and your
Yeah.
first response should be, "Have you talked to them yet?"
Yes, exactly.
100%. And the
And if
second
you're
thing is,
not comfortable talking to them, let's talk about how you get comfortable talking to them.
exactly. Now I have a coaching opportunity, right? If
Yeah,
that's the situation.
exactly.
So here's the other thing that was coming to me as you were saying that thing
Yeah.
about, when we fix it, then it actually gets better in the end. And we don't think about that at work. I'll give you a work example, and that is
Mm,
everybody that is listening to this has had a customer service issue. Like I'm talking about,
mm,
you're the customer. You've
yeah.
had a customer service issue, and you got back to the vendor, the supplier, and they fixed it. And so the customer service problem actually led to
Yeah.
higher levels of loyalty, even if
Yes.
there was a mess up on the front end. Like everybody
Yeah.
I've ever talked to about that says, "Oh, I got one of those. I got 3 of those,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
love that company now, even though,"
Yes.
right? And just an example that this isn't just at home. That might be a
Mm,
personal example, but there's a business component to it, and it's completely real.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
And I
Lisa,
think this,
go
yeah,
ahead.
no, sorry. Can I just say one more thing about the trust? Because I think it's important. I think the other thing about trust is we have to realize in the world right now, there's a loneliness epidemic. And one third of the people around the world are feeling lonely. Part of it, COVID made it worse, but it was happening before that.
Right.
So these electronic devices we have are not really helpful because we have forgotten what it's like to be fully present, to give someone our full 100% presence. If you're trying to drive trust, you need to listen and be present with somebody. This will go miles and miles or kilometers if you're in Europe to work on that.
Kilometers or kilometers? I don't know. Okay, so what I want to do is ask a couple of totally different kinds of questions
Perfect.
as
Go
we
for it.
start to wrap up, because I'm looking at the clock here. So, my question for you is this, Lisa: what do you do for fun?
Oh, what do I do for fun? Well, you heard my dog before. So I love to walk with I have two Shiba Inus. So I like to walk with them. I do yoga. I practice yoga regularly. And I just got a brand new e-bike. So I'm tearing up the streets of Basel and really enjoying getting out and doing some exercise. The last thing I love to do is I love to garden and cook.
And I also know there's
Yeah.
something else that you like, which is to read. And I see
Oh, to
books
read. Yeah.
behind you. So I'm curious, could you
Yeah.
just share with us something that you're reading now or that you've read recently that people might be interested in?
One of my favorite books that I read that I think is so profound is Everywhere You Go, There You Are by John Kabat-Zinn. I think it's a book that everyone should read. And another book I would recommend is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I think those are very profound books that will change the way you view the world.
As
And in
always,
another, yeah, and another one that if you want to go more on the heart space, The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz.
we'll have all of these in the show
Yeah.
notes.
And in the back of the book, there's actually a list of all of these books I recommend as well.
Perfect.
Yeah,
We'll have all these books in the show notes, as well
fantastic.
as Lisa's book, The Human Edge Advantage: Mastering the Art of Being All In. So let me ask this question before we wrap
Yeah,
up. Where you want to point people? Where can people
yes,
learn more? Where can they get a copy of the book? Like, where do you want to
sure.
point people before we go?
Absolutely. So if you're in the States, you can go to Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. If you're in Europe, you can find it on any of the Amazon Europe sites. You'll be able to find it as well as some local book distributors. If you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram, my first name and last name, as well as I have a website, lisadanels.com. And you can also find me on Human Edge, my work email, which is humanedge.com. Thanks, Kevin, for putting that up there. Yeah,
Human-edge.com
edge.com.
and lisadanels.com,
Yeah.
two places you can find her. And so, before we go, a question for all of you who are listening or watching. And it's the question I ask you every single week. So if you've been here before, you know what I'm going to ask. It is, now what? What are you going to take from this? Hopefully, you're going to go get a copy of Lisa's great book.
Yeah.
Perhaps you're
Me
going
too.
to dive into some of the other books that she just mentioned. But much more than that, what actions might you take? Did you get something, as we were talking about trust, that you
Mm,
need to go do? Did you have a new insight about your intuition and maybe have some ideas now about how you might use it differently
mm,
than you have in the past? Maybe the thoughts about power and the fact that there are different kinds of power, not just power over, but power with and power within.
mm.
Where my point is not to take this as an academic conversation or certainly just as an entertaining interlude,
Yeah.
but rather as a chance to take action, because it's when we take action that we'll get real lasting change and results. And so, Lisa, thanks so much for being here to help
My pleasure.
us do exactly those things. And if those of you who are listening on the podcast, I'm so glad that you are. Make sure that you subscribe wherever you're listening. If you're seeing us the first time, whether it's live on one of the social channels or whether it's elsewhere, you can always find us on your favorite platform for podcasting. And so just search for the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. You'll find us. And then you can join us every week, because every week I'll be back with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.